In my last video, I went through the speech that the King of England gave to the US Congress this week, but I deliberately left out his comments about Ukraine. I wanted to cover this as a standalone piece so that I could give more historical context about the relationship between the West and Russia. So this is what Charles actually said. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time, we answered the call. That same unyielding resolve is needed for the defense of Ukraine and her most courageous people. Let me take you back to the Second World War so that there are no gaps in the context here, because these toilet paper quality school books omit a lot. People in Western countries grow up learning about D-Day, the day that the Allied forces landed in Normandy. Every school lesson centres this. Every movie about World War II centres this day. It has become the story of how the Nazis were defeated. And the narrative from the Eastern Front is rarely covered in such exhaustive detail. But Germany had invaded the Soviet Union 3 years before D-Day. And the fighting between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front killed over 30 million people. Of those deaths, at least 26 million of them were Soviet Union. For comparison, the United States, across the whole war, across all of its theatres on a global stage, only lost 400,000 people. 400,000 is still an absurd amount, but the Soviet Union lost 27 million people. At the Battle of Stalingrad, the German 6th Army, which had about 250,000 soldiers, was surrounded and destroyed by Soviet forces. Military historians describe Stalingrad as the single most important turning point of the war. After this, Germany never mounted a successful strategic offensive again. If the Soviets had not fought back the Nazis for 3 years first, the success of D-Day would not be possible. Over 80% of German military casualties occurred on the Eastern Front. And before all the strong men get in my comments, my source is Norman Davies. This is an Oxford-educated British historian and a Poland specialist. Of the Nazis' nearly 300 Wehrmacht divisions, only 58 were stationed in France, Belgium and the Netherlands. The rest of them were fighting the Soviet Union. Had the Soviet Union either collapsed or allied with Germany, the strategic calculation changes catastrophically for the West. So when Charles says, we answered the call together after 9/11, the same we that stood against Hitler, he is drawing on this shared Western myth of heroicism and solidarity. Actually, if it wasn't for the Russians, you'd all be speaking German. In February 1945, Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin meet at Yalta in Crimea. 3 Allied superpowers sit down and decide what the post-war world will look like. The deal they reach divides Europe into spheres of influence. Eastern Europe goes to the Soviet Union, and Western Europe goes to the Anglo-Americans. The populations of these countries don't get any say, and Poland, whose government in exile in London had been Britain's formal ally throughout the war, is handed to Stalin. This is the start of the Cold War. Your toilet paper school books say this: the Soviet Union and the United States emerged from the Second World War as the 2 dominant military powers on Earth, and they immediately began organizing the world against each other. What actually happened at Yalta is not that clean. 3 men sit in a room and divide the world between themselves to suit themselves, and then immediately begin cheating each other on that arrangement. The Yalta Conference is held in February 1945. But the unravelling of these relationships started earlier. Go back to the summer, July 1944. The war is still on, the Allies are fighting in Normandy. And in New Hampshire, 44 nations gather to design the post-war financial order. The Soviet Union is invited to this, it sends delegates, and it participates in the pre-conference negotiations. If I read from toilet paper school books for a second, it says they negotiated. They signed on the final day. Then they went home and they never ratified it. The deadline for original member status passed. The Soviet Union let it expire in silence and never gave any formal explanation as to why. We invited them in and they ghost us. The Soviet position is clear if you pick up any Russian PDFs. It's also documented in the IMF's own history explicitly. This IMF history document says Stalin's advisors continued to recommend approval almost right up until the deadline, but Stalin personally decided against joining an organization that would force disclosure of basic economic data and would likely be dominated by the United States and its Western European allies. Stalin personally refused to sign up for a system that was structurally designed to subordinate the USSR to dollar supremacy. The Bretton Woods architecture gave the United States 28% of all IMF votes. The US, UK and France combined held 46.2% of all votes. That's enough to pass any resolution that Washington wants to. The entire USSR, half the planet, gets 12%. Moscow understood that joining this arrangement was going to require currency convertibility reporting to the fund, no bilateral clearing arrangements without IMF approval, no exchange controls except those that the fund sanctioned, and economic data shared with Washington-headquartered institution where the United States held veto power. In plain terms, if you signed up to be a member, you had to tell Washington what was in your bank account, you had to report your gold, currency reserves, debt and trade data to an institution that was being run out of the US. You had to make your currency work on their terms. Your currency always had to be convertible into dollar at a fixed rate. And if people in your country wanted to swap your money for dollar and conduct their trade in another nation's currency, you had to let them. If you wanted a private clearing arrangement with another country, let's say we will swap our oil with China in exchange for their machinery, no dollars involved, you needed the IMF's permission first. You could not clamp down on the flow of dollars in and out of your country, no matter what illicit trade they were conducting. If you wanted to stop money leaving your country or tightly control what people can buy with a foreign currency, you had to justify it to the IMF and get approval first, and then keep it within the limits that they approve. If ever there was a dispute, and there often was, that's how we got war in the first place, the US had the biggest stick. And within the IMF and the World Bank, your voting power is based on how much money you put in. The Soviet Union had just emerged from a war where it had bled for 3 years while the United States waited. Firstly, the United States had played a huge hand in stoking the flames of fascism before the war. Then, during the war, it refused to get involved. It stood on the sidelines, building up its own gold reserves and manipulating global markets, while 27 million Soviets died fighting the Nazis. The United States only shows up at the end of the war, in 1944, to take credit for defeating the Nazis and introduce its new plan for the financial world order that centers around it. In 1947 comes the Marshall Plan. Stalin rejects this too. Stalin says that the plan requires a level of economic transparency that he reads as surveillance and a penetration mechanism. He's probably right. The primary author of the Marshall Plan was not a diplomat. He was one of the biggest cotton traders in the world. In January 2026, so this year, the Center for Strategic and International Studies validates Stalin, basically. This research documents what the Marshall Plan narrative from toilet paper school books constantly omits. At the same time that the United States is selling the Marshall Plan as charity for a broken Europe, it was simultaneously running aggressive mineral diplomacy, quietly running a parallel program to lock down its control of the world's key metals and trade routes. The US was basically selling the war and then selling the cure. The Americans tell Europe's colonies that they are anti-colonial, that they support self-determination, and they are here to help you get freedom and liberty and individual property rights. Yet simultaneously, US financial agencies are working to accelerate colonial extraction in places like the Congo. They frame this as part of Cold War mineral security. Moscow correctly identified that the Marshall Plan was a controlled strip search of their economy, and they politely said no.